Only have an hour to paint? Let's paint this guinea pig using my 3-step process while diving into some fun techniques including masking, scraping, and splatter. Hi, I'm Jess and I teach artists how to approach watercolor in a unique way using my 3-3-3 method. You can find all the supplies I'm using for this video in my downloadable supply list and also in the video's description. And for this video, you'll also need the reference photo and a tracing of that reference photo, which you can either trace yourself or use the one I've linked in the description. Let's paint! If you're using my drawing transfer, you can print it out at 100% and it will be 8 by 10 inches, so very easy to frame. You'll see in this video that I'm actually painting an 8 by 10 image, but on a 9 by 12 sheet of paper. Sometimes it's nice to have that margin for framing. Once your supplies are ready and your image is drawn or traced out onto your piece of paper, we'll use the technique of masking to mask out his white whiskers. I like to use the back side of my pointy palette knife and dip it into the masking fluid and apply it using short strokes. You can practice applying your masking fluid on scratch paper to get the technique down before you put it on your painting. Once the masking fluid is dry, we'll begin painting the guinea pig by using my 3-step process. In general, my 3-step process starts by painting with water, but in this case, we're going to start by creating some black outlines in the areas where the proportions need to be very accurate. I've found it helpful to start portraits with these black outlines to give myself a roadmap to then follow as I continue with the 3-step process. Once these outlines, or darkest areas of color, are in place, I'm going to begin with the 3-step process, where first we'll paint areas with water, then we'll drop in color from dark to light, and then we'll finish with texture techniques. Although it is important to keep in mind that we're going to be kind of doing this 3-step process in sections, so we will be repeating the 3-step process as we go. So let's start by painting with water. Don't paint with water all the way to the edges. You're going to save your grainer brush and doing some texture techniques to create those edges with paint itself. By leaving a little bit of space on the edges with your water, you'll have the freedom to do that. We're also not going to drown the painting in water. It shouldn't be pooling or having any kind of dimension to it. You should dip your brush in the water and then push it around on the paper. If it starts not to glide across the paper easily, then you can get some more water. Getting to the point where you understand how much water to use just takes some practice. When I teach in person, it's kind of funny because typically adults use too much water and kids use too little. The thing about watercolor is you have to treat it differently than you would other mediums such as acrylic or oil. So when I say that kids use too little water, it's because they're treating it like it's an acrylic tube paint and they just kind of grab the paint and put it all over dry paper. And when I say adults use too much water, it's that they're thinking watercolor and they're putting a lot of water, mixing it in the palette, and then putting that on dry paper. By painting with plain water first, you're going to give watercolor the best chance possible to work its magic on your painting. Step 2 of the process is dropping in color from dark to light. And keeping this in mind, I've painted with water starting on the darkest section of the guinea pig. After we paint this dark side, we'll start over with the 3-step process by painting with water and then dropping in color on the light side. So I'm just taking my grainer brush, doing my darkest color, which is neutral tint, and painting nice short strokes all along the darkest areas that I see from the reference photo onto my painting. So you may be thinking, I don't really see a light side and a dark side in this reference photo. And if you look really closely, you can kind of see where that light source is coming from. So we're emphasizing that by giving the painting a light side and a dark side. This is part of the principle that I call contrast. And this is a really important part of portraiture. And in general, we'll emphasize contrast by giving our light side either less paint or a highlight color, and our dark side more paint or a shadow color. Step 3 in the process is to finish with texture techniques that we use on either matte, which is semi-wet, or dry paper. For this dark side, I'm scraping, meaning I'm using a pointy tool, in this case I'm using the back end of my palette knife, to scrape off the paint to reveal the paper underneath, while the paint is still wet but almost dry. Now it's time to go in and repeat the same 3-step process for the light side of the painting. First painting with water, then coming in with my highlight color. I'm using quinacridone rust. along with a little bit of that neutral tint to establish his gray fur. From here, I'm going to use the same 3-step process to fill in the rest of his details, painting with water and then filling in color for the side of his body and his ears and the top of his head, all the while employing the scraping technique as I see fit. Once these layers are dry, I'm coming back in with some highlight color and shadow color using my grainer brush and my round brush to either create smooth areas of color or textured areas of color on his fur. A couple more details around his nose using my round brush and some dark black paint. Filling in the areas of his eyes that I haven't painted yet with some purple on the dark side and some ultramarine blue on the light side. To make purple, I just mix rich ochre with ultramarine blue. After using some neutral tint, that black color, to create his claws, I'm going to go ahead and use the 3-step process to create the shadow underneath him. First painting with water, then dropping in the same colors we've been using for his body, quinacridone rust and neutral tint, to create a rich and dynamic shadow underneath him. Coming in with a little bit more of that highlight color on the light side, filling in some details, and we are almost done. Now it's time to remove the masking. You can use a kneaded eraser or a regular eraser or a fancy masking removal tool or even just your fingers to rub the masking off the paper. Once the masking is removed, you'll want to soften those edges. I'm just using a brush that I dampen slightly, not too much. You're not going to want to put a lot of water back into your painting. You just want a damp brush to rub the paint that's already sitting around those masked out areas into the masking a little bit to soften the edges. I'm also lifting the paint a little bit in areas where maybe I put too much. And again, that's just using a damp brush, scrubbing the paint off the paper. Finally, we're using a little bit of splatter to create some dimension and interest. And I also thought it would be fun to use a little bit of white India ink to create a couple additional highlights in his fur. And like my father-in-law always tells me, I gotta sign my paintings. I hope you had a blast painting this little guinea pig. Big shout out to ellimc on paintmyphoto.com for providing the awesome reference photo for this video. I encourage you to use Paint My Photo to find reference photos that get you excited to paint. Give this video a thumbs up if it helped you, and don't forget to grab your supply list at paint333.com. Happy painting!